Stan Lee had quite an influence on me, as I mentioned, because he would humanize, the way he humanized characters was something that appealed to me so tremendously. And so I'm sure that was a part of my whole formation and development as a writer, plus reading just gobs and gobs of science fiction, fantasy, whatever. Plus, of course, you have to draw from your own life experience. I would certainly hope you would anyway, and from who you are as a person. So when I was pitching the ideas for G.I. Joe, for example, or something like that, to me, it was just natural to focus on the characters, because I mean, that's what a story is about. A story is about the characters. The story isn't about, weapons. It isn't about vehicles. It isn't about just the action. It isn't about the plot. It's about the characters. It's who they are, what they want, what they need, what gets in their way, how do they overcome the obstacles. I mean, that is the heart of story.
Welcome to the Wait I Know You podcast, Season 2, Episode 12. My name is Nick Rounds, and I will be your host. My next guest is a screenwriter, an author, a narrative game designer, and probably your childhood hero. What is truly outrageous, though? My guest's IMDb credits, which include writing for Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, G.I. Joe, Mighty Max, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Bucky O'Hare, Conan the Adventurer, Darkstalkers, Reboot, Beast Wars, X-Men Evolution, He-Man the Master Universe, Biker Meister Mars, and oh yeah, she's also head writer and story editor for Jem The Holograms. To quote Dan Larson from Toy Galaxy, she's your favorite writer that you never knew you loved so much. And we haven't even touched on her film, TV, comic, or game credits yet, because that's how much of a titan she is. More on that later. Showtime synergy, Christy Marx. Wait, I know you. How are you today?
Hi there. And you do know me, and I know you.
Yeah, we are former coworkers indirectly, because we both worked at Zynga.
At Zynga, yeah.
How are you?
I'm good.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me today. You were marveling, no pun intended, at my X-Men poster behind me, which I can only see if I... Oop, no, that's you. Try that again. This X-Men poster.
There we go.
Before we got started. So before you got into animation, you were involved in comics. And before you got in comics, what actually made you a voracious reader is comics. Can you talk to me about some of the characters that resonated with you the most when you were a kid?
Well, I started out reading DC comics when I was first getting into comic books. That was pretty much all there was, really. And so I was very, very much into Lois Lane, big into Lois Lane, because there weren't a lot of female characters really being offered up. In fact, I used to take the Batman. I would buy Batman and, just about everything, Superman, Batman, Jimmy Olsen, Supergirl, whatever, But I would take the Batman comics, and I would take a ballpoint pen and I would turn Robin into a girl, so that I could, in that way, vicariously be a part of those adventures. So I was very much into Lois Lane. And then I finally discovered Marvel Comics when they just started coming out. And like you said, that poster you have, which is a print of X-Men #1, was a comic that I bought off a spinner rack. In the old days, of course, you went and found them in grocery stores in spinner racks. So I actually bought that comic right off of the rack along with Fantastic Four. And then from that point on, it was just pretty much all Marvel with me. And I bought basically everything they put out, pretty much everything they put out. There might have been a couple of rare exceptions, but I was just obsessed with comics from a very, very early age.
Yeah, Robin especially. I mean, if you don't know Robin well, Robin comes off as an androgynous character. I mean, just because of the lack of pants. There's no judgment there. I'm just saying. And then I don't think we actually got a female Robin until Frank Miller did Dark Knight Returns, right? I think.
Yeah, much, much, much later. I don't remember exactly, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's smart. What are some of your favorite storylines, either from DC or Marvel, in terms of that still kind of stick with you?
Oh man. You know, in the old days, again, going back, they didn't do continued storylines. I mean, pretty much everything was standalone. It was really not into till you got into some of the Marvel Age stuff that it became more of a serialized kind of a story. And I mean, the early Spider-Man stuff was just wonderful because Stan had this great way of injecting all these soap opera elements into the stories along with the superhero elements, which certainly appealed to me. So, you know, a lot of the early Spider-Man stuff where he's always the underdog and nothing ever quite goes right with him. And in the X-Men, of course, the whole Phoenix saga, which was, you know, one of the best, I think, classic stories that they did. That was great stuff. And I loved Ditko's Doctor Strange. The visuals were just so amazing. And the same is true, of course, of what Kirby did with Fantastic Four, all those amazing visuals, and Galactus and Silver Surfer and all the other dimensions. I mean, he just did amazing stuff. So that's kind of going back to the earlier days, but that's the stuff that sticks with me.
All that wonderful Kirby crackle, psychedelic, crazy jump off the page artwork.
And Ditko too. I mean, Ditko stuff was just amazing.
Yeah, when I think of classic Spider-Man, I really think about the Ditko era. Like the way that he drew Spider-Man is it's incomparable in terms of just like how much it just feels like home. And even even in like the latest Spider-Man movie, No Way Home, like they do an homage again to another Ditko classic costume with like a little tiny spider in the back. And yeah, that gave me the feels for sure. So you kind of alluded to this talking about Stan Lee, but Stan Lee used to be a coworker of yours, which it makes me sad that he's no longer with us. But can you talk to me what it was like to actually work with Stan Lee?
Well, I certainly would not call him a coworker. Let me put it that way. I mean, he was my boss, but he didn't act like a boss. I mean, Stan was an amazing man in that he, as a person, he was kind of a big overgrown puppy dog, you know, was just always friendly. And I mean, all of that whole persona of his, I mean, it was on like that all the time. And he was wildly creative. I mean, the man was a fire hose of ideas, you know, he just never ended with the kind of ideas that he had. So when I very, very first started out in animation, Stan had just moved to LA, was working with the Patty Freeling Studios. And that was where I got the job working on the Fantastic Four. And they were still figuring out, I mean, he didn't really understand what the animation process was. So he was still kind of figuring that out. So at first it was a little bit weird. But I mean, we had Jack Kirby doing storyboards for us on that Fantastic Four, which is just here I am. I'm this crazed comic book fan who grew up on this stuff. And here I am working with Stan Lee and side by side with him and working on stuff that he gives me to work on. And there's Jack Kirby doing the storyboards for my very first animation script. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
That's incredible.
But, you know, Stan just would hand out a lot of ideas, premises, outlines, or what have you, and you know, toss them to me and then have me go work on them, you know, write a script from that. And and later on, I was pitching my own ideas, but a lot of the early stuff that I did was developing characters that he wanted to develop, like doing like mini Bibles, basically, based on characters that he wanted to develop. And there was one time that he gave me he hadn't sold the X-Men as a series, but he wanted to, and he gave me an outline for an X-Men story and had me write it as a script. So I have a script for an X-Men story based on Stan Lee's outline from 1979 that never got made. So it just kind of
that's awesome.
A little piece of history.
So I want to actually go back to comics. We jumped a little bit ahead to animation stuff, but I actually do want to touch on something is that you've written for quite a few comics as well. And, you know, obviously you got excited and inspired about reading and writing because of that. And you've written for quite a few comics. What specific books were you most excited about writing for?
Oh, I loved Conan, of course. I was crazy about Conan, so I loved writing for Conan. I loved writing for Red Sonja. And I have to be honest, the thing I got the most happy and excited about was my own original creations, like the Sisterhood of Steel. But aside from that, I mean, I loved when I got to do the Amethyst reboot for DC Comics. I really, really enjoyed doing that. I guess, and working with Wendy Pini on ElfQuest, I mean, that was just wonderful. That was a fantastic experience because Wendy and I got to be friends, and she's just such an amazing woman, an amazing creative spirit, and an amazing person. And so working with her on that story, which was a story that also had a lot of very personal, relevant meaning to her, that was a fantastic experience. So I enjoyed that thoroughly.
That's awesome. And you mentioned Sisterhood of Steel. I'm bringing it up really quick.
That was a series that I created and that was published by a branch of Marvel Comics that was called Epic. And Epic was created to produce creator-owned books so that, you know, creators like Steve Gerber and other people would come to them with their own ideas, and like I did. And yeah, there you go. And they put out 8 issues of the Sisterhood, and we were going to do follow it up with some graphic novels, and we got into a bit of a unhappy censorship disagreement because they had some distributors from the South who didn't understand that these were mature level comics because it was new. It was a really new thing. People hadn't really done it yet. I mean, it was at the very, very beginning of finding a market for adult comics, and so these distributors got a little bit bent out of shape because of we were using nasty words. and so there was this decree to censor certain things in one of my books, and I took offense to that, and Archie Goodwin took offense to me taking offense to that, and so he killed the deal. And so then at that time, I was married to Australian artist Peter Ledger, and so he and I went out and created a graphic novel, which was co-published with Eclipse Comics, which was one of the larger independent comic publishers of the time. So it is something that I own completely, that is mine, and therefore very dear to my heart.
Yeah, everything that. Yeah, because I heard that you mentioned this in another interview that the stuff that you're most passionate about at this point is just creating original stories that you wholly own that come from you, and I think that's really awesome and important. Just because, like, I knew a lot about your writing before I knew you, and then after meeting you at Zynga and actually seeing your IMDb credits, I was like, oh my god, she's responsible for so many things that I've seen, and then and even just going back and doing my research and rewatching some of the Spider-Man Amazing Friends and stuff like that. Like the thing that always blows me away is just like how you really humanize characters and actually give them like a fully fleshed out, well-rounded just life. And I was actually going back and watching some of the Spider-Man and G.I. Joe episodes. And can you explain your process of how you flesh out characters? I know that you have some of that explained in this book, which is a great resource, and that is a plug, which we'll plug again later. But do you pull from real life inspiration, or do you kind of just pull from like the ether, as it were?
I would say it's probably a combination of things. Since I have been steeped my entire life in reading fantasy and science fiction and comic books, obviously I draw a lot from that and from what has been done. And I would say probably Stan Lee had quite an influence on me, as I mentioned, because he would the way he humanized characters was something that appealed to me so tremendously. And so I'm sure that was a part of my whole formation and development as a writer, plus reading just gobs and gobs of science fiction, fantasy, whatever. Plus, of course, you have to draw from your own life experience. I would certainly hope you would anyway, and from who you are as a person. So when I was pitching the ideas for G.I. Joe, for example, or something like that, to me, it was just natural to focus on the characters, because I mean, that's what a story is about. A story is about the characters. The story isn't about, weapons. It isn't about vehicles. It isn't about just the action. It isn't about the plot. It's about the characters. It's who they are, what they want, what they need, what gets in their way, how do they overcome the obstacles. I mean, that is the heart of story. That is what story is about. So if you're not focusing on your characters, you're not doing it right.
Somebody has to save the cat.
Oh, please. Okay.
I'm just kidding. I had to get that one in. Do you have any specific storylines that you know offhand that you for sure know that you pulled from real life, of an experience of your own life that you put into a story?
Nothing that I could really just super specifically point at. No.
Okay.
I just mean more generally, like who you are as a person, how you developed as a person, what is your sense of morality and ethics, because that comes into play when you're doing any kind of a story where you have any sense of good versus evil, and life is not that simple. It's a whole series of grays in between. So where do you fall on that, and how do you understand the nuances of your ethics and your morality, and where do you put that into your characters?
Makes a lot of sense.
One of the first things you want to realize is if you're creating a villain, someone who's supposed to be evil or whatever, they don't necessarily see themselves that way. So even a villain is going to be the hero of their own story. So, what is it that they feel they're doing that is somehow right or correct, or is the way things that should go? Like in the Sisterhood, my main character is this young warrior who is only just finishing her training, about to go out into the world, and she unfortunately crosses paths in a very bad way with one of the leaders of the Sisterhood, the Princess of Swords. And the Princess of Swords she's not evil, but she has an agenda. She has a very, very strong, powerful agenda. She wants power, but she also has a very strong agenda regarding the survival of the Sisterhood. And she doesn't see that there's any room for weakness. And so if she perceives a weakness in this, like she does in this character, or that our character is associated with the wrong person, then she thinks she's doing the right thing to take that person down. And she thinks that taking that person down is for the good of the Sisterhood. Well, that's not how our character feels about it, because she's the one that's being attacked. So,
right.
Characters should be nuanced. They should have more layers to them. They should not just be cardboard cutouts. That's the main thing.
So the reason we know each other is because of games, because you and I were both game designers at Zynga. And before we jump ahead to Zynga, which will be its own can of worms, because I know you have some opinions, especially given recent news, I'm sure. But can you talk to me about how you got involved in games in the first place? Specifically, how you joined Sierra?
Yeah, that was a wonderful bit of happenstance. So my husband Peter Ledger and I were living in this mountain town called Wrightwood. And I had split my career up basically between comics and animation. And I was right on the verge of doing a Twilight Zone episode. And then the Writers Guild went on strike. And this strike dragged on and on and on, like for months. So there was some question as to whether that job was ever going to happen. And in the meantime, it was one of those bad cycles where the animation work dried up, the comic book work dried up. And I mean, just nothing was happening, and it was not a lot of fun. And out of the blue, we get this phone call from a headhunter that Sierra Online had hired, looking for artists, because Sierra Online, which is one of the first game companies ever, of course, decided to locate in this town, another mountain town called Oakhurst, which is just outside of Yosemite. And so we're talking about a little mountain town that's far from pretty much anything. The nearest big town was Fresno. And so, obscure place, and they were having trouble getting people to come there and work for them. But they called and they wanted to know if Peter would be interested in doing art for computer games. And me being me, I never miss an opportunity. So I said, well, what about writers? Do they have any need for writers? And so they came back with, well, yeah, we'd sure love to meet with a artist writer team. And so we drove up there and we met with Ken and Roberta Williams, which was an interesting experience in itself.
Why is that?
Well, you have to understand that this is the classic story of a game company literally starting out of someone's kitchen. And, with Ken being a programmer and his wife, Roberta, just being his wife basically, and having no particular training, but nonetheless, she started working with him to create video games, some of the very, very first, especially the first with graphics.
Right.
And then it grew into quite a big company, with lots of employees, and they needed to hire lots more designers and so forth. And they would pretty much hire anybody to come and design a game for them. I mean, because at the time, it's important to remember that nobody knew how to design a game. Nobody was trained to be a game designer. There were no courses. There was no established job position. Nobody knew anything about it. It was all being invented as we went along. And so they would hire like a ex-police officer, Jim Walls, to do the police story, the police games and so forth. And so anyway, they met with us, and it was like little Hollywood stars in their eyes because Peter and I both had worked on Hollywood projects. I'd written for Hollywood, and so we ended up making a deal right on the spot. Like, we just met with them, talked with them, and they said, I said, well, they asked if there was anything I particularly wanted to do in a game. And I said, well, my main question is, who owns it? And do you own the IP? Would I own the IP? Would I have any ownership if I create original IP for you? And they're like, no, we have to own everything. And I said, well, in that case, I'm not going to create anything original for you. Do you have something else you would want? And they said, well, we've been thinking we'd love to have a King Arthur game. I said, great. I would love to do a King Arthur game. That would be wonderful fun. And so that was how we arrived at that. And we just basically drove up there, met with them, and just made a deal right on the spot. And we sold our house, we moved up to Oakhurst, and started working for Sierra. And it was that kind of a early situation. And of course, once I got there, there was nobody to teach me anything. There were, like I was saying before, there was no training, there were no books, there were no courses, and there was nothing. And so I had to teach myself what a computer game was, how it worked, going around talking to everybody that was on my team, talking to the programmers, talking to the artists, saying, show me your tools, tell me what we can and can't do. And sitting there playing the games and playing the games until I had a sense of how they worked and how the player's mindset would be. So it was a huge process of training myself to be a game designer, which is really interesting.
I remember I had an old coworker that had been testing games since like the early Nintendo days when Nintendo first came out, and this is a time in, like, I want to say like 2009 or 2010 when obviously we all have computers. He's like, yeah, I used to write bugs on pencil and paper, and my head exploded a little bit. I was like, of course you did. And you're just handing them to the programmer. But I'm just like, oh my god, that feels like writing down bugs on a Flintstone tablet with like stone.
Yeah, this was 1988 that we moved up there and started working on the game. Yeah,
that's wild.
And I had, before that, I had only ever seen one computer game, and that was Cosmic Osmo. It was on somebody's early Apple, and I was impressed with it. I thought it was a very cool thing, but I had never seen any other computer games until I started working for Sierra, and then I had to suddenly sit down and play all their computer games.
And suddenly you're an expert. Do you have any favorites, either from Sierra or I guess these days? Any video games that really resonate with you?
The things that are more story-oriented would resonate with me. I haven't had a whole lot of time, to be honest with you, to play a lot of games, especially recently. I played World of Warcraft almost from day one, not quite day one, but pretty close, until I finally just burned out on it. Like last year, I finally burned out on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I mean, I really like that MMO kind of a world, and I was, God, it's probably some kind of a cliche, but anyway, I was a night elf hunter, and I just loved having my big cats, running alongside me and using a bow and being in a fantasy world, running around inside that fantasy world, interacting with other people. I really liked that aspects of it. What I didn't like, there were a lot of the mechanics I didn't like, and the lack of lack of story, which is always a problem in an MMO. I'm not saying there wasn't a story, but it wasn't a fulfilling sense of story. It wasn't the kind of story that you really remember, and it's they have to be too open-ended to do a genuine story.
Yeah, when you're
and then they hide story behind mechanics like the fucking twisting nether, which I never had time for. I didn't have time for that crap, and it was ugly and unpleasant, and it was like you hide your story behind that. It's like, oh, that was one of the things that finally drove me away.
I mean, you know this very well, I guess. Can you expand on why writing a linear story is difficult in a game like that versus another game where you can kind of control the way that the story flows?
Well, it's always going to be difficult. The more agency you have to give to the player, the more trouble you're going to have telling any kind of a story, because true story is obviously linear, because it has some kind of a beginning, middle, and an end, and you parcel things out to people in a way that takes them through this experience. In an open-ended world, you have to create more like modules of story that can be accessed, of course, in any way at any time and whatever. The more agency, the harder it is to tell a coherent story, is what it gets down to, because without controlling the story, it's hard to build up the emotional beats that you need to really make the player feel something. I mean, it can be done, and usually it's done in games that have at least somewhat more of a linear structure, or have a way to give out those little modules of story in a way that are a little bit more sequential. So it's a give and take. It's a give and take between how much complete agency you want to give the player, like in a sandbox game, where they'll put the pieces together however they want to, and you just have to allow them to do that. But it's going to dilute the effect that you can have.
Do you have any specific games that you were most satisfied with in terms of putting your creative stamp on it?
I mean, the two games that I did for Sierra Online, it was just the most wonderful experience, and that's what I feel the best about, obviously, because they really were mine. I was completely in control. I designed every single aspect of the game and oversaw the entire production of the game, and right down to signing off during Q&A of the game, everything like that. So those are always going to be the dearest to my heart. There's just no way around it. The more, when I have control over something and I can do it creatively the way I want to do it, obviously that's going to be what I love the most.
Yeah, I feel the same way. The projects that I've built or designed from the ground up, like they're my babies for sure. Mm-hmm. And for context, the games that you're talking about from Sierra is Conquest of the Longbow, The Legend of Robin Hood, and Conquest of Camelot, The Search for the Grail.
Right.
Which are both award-winning video games, and you can play at GOG.com, and you can find those links at ChristyMarx.com for context.
Yeah. The Camelot game came first, and then and it was kind of amusing because after I finished Camelot, I walked into, and it had been out for a while, I walked into Ken's office, and there's this award sitting on the desk, and I looked at this award, and it said Best Computer Game for Conquest of Camelot, and I was like, what's that? Ken said, oh, they won this award. You want to have it? And I said, yeah, I want to have it. I grabbed it and took off with it.
It's like finding out.
He didn't even told me.
It's like finding out you won an Oscar when you're like out sick or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous. And then I was getting ready, working on the second game, starting to do some early thoughts. And I was initially thinking I was going to do something about Greek goddesses. I kind of wanted to do a whole goddess kind of a thing. And so, but Roberta kept dropping these weird little hints to me, like, oh, there's a lot of projects out there about Robin Hood. And I was thinking, oh yeah, there's like 4 or 5 movies in development or something. But I wasn't really thinking anything more about it. And then she came up to me and she said, I had a dream that you were working on a Robin Hood game. And the penny finally dropped. I was like, why didn't she just say to me, we'd like you to do a Robin Hood game? And it would have been, okay, fine. So I said, yeah, great idea. Yeah, Robin Hood game. So thereby became my Robin Hood game. So
that's hilarious. the strongest suggestion possible without actually asking you to do
I
it.
know it's so simple. I mean, to my mind anyway, but I think maybe I never quite came to terms with this, but I believe that a lot of people were actually intimidated by me. And I don't know why, because I don't think I'm an intimidating person, but I've been encountering more of that. And at Zynga, I actually did get accused of being intimidating twice
Really?
on the first project that I worked on, which was that awful. It was another form of Mafia Wars. It was going to be a 3D form of Mafia Wars or whatever it was.
Mafia Wars 2?
Yeah.
Was that your first project at Zynga?
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I got hired on to work on. And it was such a mismatch. And I even said to them up front, this is not the kind of game I would normally want to work on or enjoy working on. And so unless we can bring some shades of gray to the morality of this game, it's not going to be very interesting to me. Well, it was a disaster just in so many different ways. I can hardly tell you, but I got called on the carpet twice for being intimidating. Literally, called into an office with the boss and, a couple of other people and just told flat out, you're intimidating. You're being written up as being intimidating. I'm like, what? I love working with you guys. What is this? But the problem at Zynga is that it wasn't a game company. It didn't really start as a game company. I mean, it made games, but there were no game designers initially. And so everything was done by these PMs, the production managers. And so the production managers were used to being treated like gods. So I get hired on and I'm a game designer and I'm, this young, arrogant PM is like doing all this stupid crap. And I kept calling him on it. And so that's why I was told I was intimidating.
Yeah, the product managers for sure. I've heard this about from like accountants. They talk about like Arthur Andersen or Price Waterhouse in terms of like being the places where like the best accountants come from, and Zynga got the reputation for having some of the best product managers. But as you mentioned, that product managers were treated like gold, and everybody else is kind of treated like crap, or at least as like second citizens sometimes, because they really gave the keys of the castle to most of the product managers there.
I know, and when they finally started hiring some game designers, they didn't know what to do with them. I mean, they treated game designers like shit, if you don't mind my language, but they did. At least initially, in this particular instance that I'm thinking of. And so I was trying to take a stand for game designers, and the game designers were like kind of standing back going, "Oh, don't get us involved." They didn't come to my aid or back me up at all. They just wanted to save their jobs.
That's frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, one of the things I was super thankful for is the game design. It was either a weekly or monthly meeting that we had that we're all part of, that Nina Dobner organized for us. I thought that was always a highlight of the month or the week for me, for sure.
It got better, and it also depended, I think, on what team you were working on. With Zynga, everything was so siloed in Zynga in terms of teams that it really did depend on what team you're working on and who you happen to have as a boss, and that determined an awful lot of the experience.
Yeah, I started on Mafia Wars, and then I went to poker, and there was times where I didn't have a boss or I didn't have many other coworkers, and I was still very much a young game designer. So I was so thankful to just have the cross-pollination of all of us there, because that's the thing that kind of sucks, is just like, if you're a game designer, you're typically one of the only few game designers on like a team of like 200 people sometimes, which can feel difficult. And I'm not trying to have game designer therapy here, but I guess we're having game designer therapy.
We kind of are.
Yeah, but I digress. But I'm curious, what was your opinion of Zynga before you joined? Because I had a very distinct opinion about Zynga before I joined.
Well, I had a friend who was working at Zynga, and she was also a young game designer. And so she kept trying to talk me into coming to work for Zynga. And
who was that specifically, if you don't mind me name dropping them?
I guess she wouldn't mind. Erin Hoffman.
Okay.
And she was a wonderful, wonderful person. I adored her. But she kept trying to get me to come and work at Zynga. And I had I was remarried, and my current husband, Randy Littlejohn, and I had done games together and done animation scripts together. And so we moved to San Mateo to work at Slipgate Ironworks, which was a company that was formed by John Romero and a bunch of other people, mostly VC finance kind of people. And they wanted to do an MMO for kids. That was their project. So I got hired to develop the IP and do all of the story design and writing for that game. And then Randy also got hired on a little bit later on. And so we spent a couple of years working on that particular project. And that's another whole gigantic story into itself. But it was
if you want to talk about it, by all means, but that's up to you.
I mean, I got to know the best part about that experience is that I got to know John Romero, who is one of my favorite people. I adore John Romero. He is such a wonderful person. I just think he's so much fun to talk to and be around and so forth. Unfortunately, John was more interested in sitting in his office and doing programming than in actually being a creative director. And so even though he had the title of creative director, we basically had this team of very strong-minded people in the programming side, my side, the story side, on the art side, and we just clashed a lot because there wasn't any one strong central voice that was actually running the project. And it was also at the head were people who didn't understand about making games. And they made they made a couple of gigantic mistakes. One of the first things I was taught at Sierra Online, when I was working with Robert Heitman, who was their senior tech guy, co-wrote their game engine, I would keep saying to him, can we do such and such a thing? And he would say, we can do anything. Do you have the time and do you have the budget? And so he taught me something very, very important about games is that it's about scheduling and it's about budget. And those two things are very strongly intertwined, obviously, because time is money. And unfortunately, at Slipgate Ironworks, nobody seemed to take that seriously. And so you had these VC guys at the head who could bring in tons of money. And they kept saying, we just want this to be the best game ever, AAA game. I mean, we want it to just be amazing. Don't worry about money. Don't worry about schedule. I'm sorry, you just can't make a game that way. It's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster to do that because you have to say, we want to get something out. Something has to get done. You can't just have these interminable, nothing constraining you. You actually need constraints. Believe it or not, it may seem counterintuitive, but you actually need that. And we didn't have that. And we didn't have people who knew how to schedule or move things along. And then they picked the wrong engine for the game. And so ultimately it was a technical disaster as well. And so after about putting 2.5 years of our lives into this, it went away. As these things so often do in the game business, you all get called into a big room and told, okay, we're shutting down. It's goodbye, go home. Yeah. That's happened to me more than once.
Yep, same.
And so we had just, like I said, we had put like 2.5 years of our lives into this, and we'd moved to San Mateo for it. So I spent about a year just doing consulting jobs and other kind of independent game jobs that came along. And so Aaron kept saying to me, to get back to the original story, Aaron kept saying, you should come work at Zynga. You should come work at Zynga. There's this game that needs you, and needs a good writer. And my opinion, as you had asked, all I knew about, I think, was Farmville. I think that was really, and I, in order to get a sense, I sat down and played Farmville to try to get a sense, which was a Facebook game at the time, and trying to get a sense of it. And I couldn't understand what they needed a writer for. I was like, why would you need a writer for these games? There's no story. There's no, but someone had inadvertently put a little tiny sliver of story into Farmville and it had gone crazy. And so suddenly there was like this, oh, hey, we should put story in our games because it makes them go viral and, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
So finally, because I no longer had a job and, I was having, consulting is okay, but it only takes you so far. And so I thought, okay, fine, I'll go check it out. And so I went and interviewed and finally decided I would come on board and see what it was all about.
My opinion of Zynga was kind of like, it felt like a flash in the pan company initially. I remember kind of passing on initially because I was working at Activision at the time, and then
which is a real game company.
Yes, but they laid me off, so screw them. And then especially these days, I could care less for Activision, but that's neither here nor there. But that's for various reasons, specifically their CEO. But yeah, I was in a.
And then he ended up running Sierra Online, which is like the most horrible irony of all.
Yeah, some of my favorite games growing up beyond LucasArts. If it wasn't LucasArts, it was definitely from Sierra or Dynamic specifically. There's so many good graphics games and RPGs that came out of Sierra. So yeah, such a huge fan. But I was in a 7-Eleven, and I remember saying no to the Zynga job, and then being in a 7-Eleven and seeing a Slurpee cup that had Mafia Wars, Yeovil, and Farmville on it, and being like, all right, I guess I better apply. Like, if they gotten big enough for 7-Eleven, I guess I have to apply now. Because I thought they were just like a flash in the pan before that. Because they were in a chip factory for like a half a second in the mission, or I guess for Terra Hill technically. But good times.
Yeah, I remember passing by and seeing a plaque on the door where the original Zynga was. And then when I started, they were in a building south of Market somewhere, I think it was, before they bought the really big building that they moved into.
Right, the old Sega building with
the old Sega building, yeah.
All the things to distract you from actually working, like a bar downstairs. And the Z culinary.
They fed us well. They had one hell of a great culinary department.
They did.
I kept gaining weight.
Well, yeah, that was a joke. Is the old Zynga 15? Like, I walked to work, but yeah, definitely for sure. I think it was mainly because I was drinking too much on Fridays, just because I was so frustrated at work. All right, enough therapy for me. I'm sorry. Let's move on to post Zynga, because we're obviously both still salty. At least one of us is. Oh god, I don't want to do a hard left in that. Actually, I'm just going to bring it up anyway, because it is a hard left, but I think it's very important to mention. So you were affected by the 2008 California Campfire Wildfire, which is terrible. And thankfully you escaped with your husband and 6 cats safely and not much else, unfortunately. And losing all your home and practically all your personal effects. How has that experience changed your perspective on life?
Oh, radically. I think unless you actually experience a loss like that, it's almost impossible to truly comprehend it. So it was October of 2018, and we got up as we usually did in the morning, not expecting anything to be different about life, getting ready to feed the cats, getting ready to have breakfast, and we noticed something very strange was happening outside, and we stepped out onto the back deck, and I even took a video. It was so strange that I actually took a video of it with my phone, and there was this heavy wind blowing. There were all these dark clouds that were blowing, and the trees were moving like crazy. And it was like, what is this? There wasn't supposed to be a storm today. And then we had signed up, because wildfire was always a danger in that area. We had signed up for red alerts, and we got this red alert that said evacuation warning, meaning get out now. And we did. We raced around. We had a lockbox that we already had prepared with vital papers in it as part of our wildfire preparation. We put all the cats into their carrier, shoved them into the back of a Subaru Impreza, grabbed, a few clothes. I grabbed just a few pieces of jewelry, and we got the hell out of there. But it took 6 hours, at least 6 hours it was, for a trip that we usually take maybe half an hour. And that's because we were amongst hundreds of cars on this little tiny mountain road trying to get out of the mountains. And we couldn't go south. We were in Magalia, which is a little bit north of Paradise. And we didn't even know how bad it was in Paradise. I mean, Paradise was just literally just, at that point, complete conflagration, burning to the ground. So it hadn't quite reached Magalia yet. So hundreds and hundreds of cars on this little tiny road trying to get out, trying to escape. And it just took hours and hours and hours. And by the time we got down to Chico, the sky was literally black. I mean, we could see, as we drove down this one stretch of road, we could look over to the ridge where Paradise and Magalia were located and just see it all on fire. see everything on fire. And then, of course, you're homeless. You're suddenly homeless. You got nowhere to go. We have 6 cats. We took them to an emergency shelter that had been set up for that purpose. And then we had to go try to find a hotel to stay in. And of course, here we are. We're amongst thousands of people that have escaped and are looking for a place to stay. And we finally found this horrible, crappy little place that we could stay for a couple of nights. And it became a series of finding a place to stay, one hotel after another, and then having to find a place where the cats could be kept because they couldn't keep them at the emergency shelter any longer. So we got very, very lucky and found a very nice, large animal hospital that was willing to board them for free. They didn't even charge us except for like medicines and so forth. And the cats were boarded for like 8 months. They had to be live in cages. I mean, we go see them every day and everything, but so we're homeless. The cats are being boarded, and everything's gone. Everything you had in the world is gone. I mean, it's like your personal possessions. It's like everything my mother or father ever gave me, and all the furniture I inherited from her, or my husband's family Bible with all of their genealogy in it, and all of your personal photos, and in our case, both of us actually, but every single book I ever wrote, and Randy wrote books, and all of my comics and all of our games, and just a memorabilia, everything is gone. It's almost impossible to comprehend what that feels like. It's just so devastating. And of course, we didn't know right away whether the house had burned down. We had to wait days to find out whether our house had actually survived or not. So that you're in this for anticipation of, oh my God, do we have a home or don't we? And then you not only not have a home, you have nothing. And it's little things would trip you up too. I mean, we finally got into an apartment temporarily while we looked for a new house to buy. And all the little things that trip you up, like you don't even have salt or a salt shaker. You don't have a vegetable peeler to prepare vegetables. You have nothing. Like absolutely nothing, and it keeps tripping up constantly. And we, even to this day, it's been 2.5 years since then. Even to this day, every once in a while, Randy and I stop and go, I just thought of something else that we lost. And I just remembered another thing that we lost, because there's so much that you lose that it takes a while that you actually catch up to you. But I would say the most profound effect that it had certainly on me, and I think on Randy as well, is that I no longer want to be burdened with a lot of stuff. It has completely changed how I feel about having too many physical objects and things to have to worry about. I've replaced most of my books, my comics, things that I have written. I lost my entire print run of Sisterhood of Steel and every other comic I had ever written. So I have managed to replace those, to get copies of those. And I'm trying to get, I got a copy of Conquest of Camelot, but I'm still trying to get a good copy of the Robin Hood game. And so I'm trying to replace at least one copy of those things that I worked on. And I've just bought a few of my very favorite books. And obviously I had to have a set of Lord of the Rings and so there's just buying the few books that really mean something to me, and everything else I just read in ebook form. And just got the minimum of what we needed. The minimum amount of furniture, the minimum amount of kitchen stuff, minimum amount of ordinary objects. I mean, trying to not be once again burdened down with tons and tons of stuff that could just suddenly go away. So it has radically changed my feeling about having personal possessions.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry again for such a hard left turn after talking about Zynga, but I think it's really important for one, people know that you went through that, and two, like, not a lot of people, very few people have had that experience. And I'm very curious. I was just really curious what your perspective is, just because, like, losing, as you mentioned, every physical piece of media or anything else that you have, like, what does that do to you, and how does that reshape how you feel about those things? So thank you very much for sharing that.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm incredibly glad that I had gotten around to scanning and digitizing many of my early scripts, which had been written pre-computer or which I only had paper copies, but not all of them, unfortunately. So I did lose some, but I had digitized most of them, or at least a lot of them. I had digitized a lot of my family photos, and I had digitized even some audio tapes. And I have to say, I'm really profoundly glad that I did that, because otherwise I would literally have had none of that. So I at least have digitized copies, even if I no longer have the physical copy. So I would kind of urge people to think about that.
Yeah, makes sense. So one of the things that you started working on after the fire is this, which is writing for animation, comics, and games. Let me make myself bigger, which is now in the second edition, and you updated it.
I was working on it before the fire.
Oh.
And I, in fact, had gotten through maybe 2/3 of it before the fire. And then there was like a year. I basically lost a year of my life because of the fire and being homeless, and our computers burned up, and we had laptop, but kind of lost a year of time there. But once we got into a new home and got settled in and so forth, I got back to work on the book. So that's why it took so long to get done.
And from reading it, it's a fantastic resource for anybody that is curious about getting into comic animation or games. If you don't have any context about what it takes to get in there, everything that Christy has written in the book is just absolutely fantastic. It'll help you understand each of those very well. And so I obviously know all the game stuff, but going through the animation and comic stuff, like hearing all the insider, because you have lingo, you have glossary of terms, like it's a fantastic resource.
And there's so much crossover. The reason I did 3 in the book together is because there's so much crossover these days between animation, comics, and games in terms of the IPs being developed in all of those forms. And so it's really I think it's very wise for a writer to have as many arrows in the quiver as you can have, and be able to work in the different forms of media.
Are you working on any other books at this current juncture?
I've been trying to get back to something that I started working on actually while I was at Zynga, and I never quite got it finished, which is a memoir about Jem and the Holograms, creating the animation series and the development of the animation series. So I really want to get back to that one of these days, but I've had to get that other book out of the way first.
A gemoir, if you will.
A gemoir, yes. A really clever fan came up with that, and I'm using it.
Yeah, I heard that from a different interview, and I got a chuckle out of that one.
I mean, I have to be honest. I have been offered many game jobs and narrative design jobs over the past couple of years, and I keep turning them down because I'm just so tired of working on other people's IP. I want to try to stay more focused on my own original creations at this point.
That makes sense. I mean, you mentioned that earlier in negotiations with Sierra. Had you been burned before, or were you just kind of tired of making other people rich and working on characters that you didn't own?
It wasn't not really a matter of being burned, but it was always something that meant something to me, to be able to own a creative property. I mean, most of my career really has to do with working on other people's IP, adapting it or whatever it was. And I just feel strongly about creative people being able to own their work and being able to own what they've created. And in most of the business, you can't do that because it's either you're working on an established IP, like if you're working for one of the big comic book companies, obviously you're going to be working on an established IP, whether it's Spider-Man, X-Men, or whatever, Superman, whatever. I mean, obviously that's going to be a work for hire situation. But I feel very strongly about trying to own anything that I've created that is my original creation. I have strong feelings about that, and I think most creative people should be able to do that.
Yeah, that was one thing I didn't know about until after the fact, that unless you create the character, you don't get residuals from it. Like Ed Brubaker worked on The Winter Soldier and wrote all those stories for the Winter Soldier, which of course became the movies. But he hasn't seen a penny because of that, because Bucky and Captain America are not his original characters, and yet they use the entire storyline from it. But luckily, Marvel made it right after the fact, air quotes. But yeah,
DC was actually pretty good about that. They're pretty good about paying some of the original creators money, some character rights stuff.
That's good.
So I always thought DC had I don't know, since I haven't recently worked for Marvel, I don't know what they're like, but when I was working for DC, I thought they treated me quite well in that respect.
Did you, were there any specific characters that you wrote for DC that you were super excited to work on, to like get into their backstory and work on them?
The Amethyst thing I really liked. Because they gave it to me as a reboot, and so I was able to put a lot more of my original creativity into it. And I wish I could have taken that a bit further and done more with it, but I really enjoyed what I came up with for that.
Awesome.
I wrote a whole Bible for it. I mean, because I come from writing for, developing and doing lots of development work for animation series, and I did develop so many animation series. And so one of the things you always do is you write a Bible, which lays out what the basis of the series is and who the characters are, their biographies, how they interact with one another, storylines. I mean, Bible is basically the writer's guide to an entire series. And I brought that over into games. I did it at Zynga. I would create Bibles even on the little mobile games that I worked on. I would still create Bibles for them, for Castleville Legends and for, Farmville Tropic Escape. I still created Bibles for those things and in great detail. So I'd created a detailed Bible for Amethyst when I worked on that, and had a lot of fun. I actually love world building, so I'm really, really into the world building aspect as well as the character creation aspect.
The thing that you're most known for, of course, is Jem and the Holograms. And Hasbro came to you with it, but you really took it and ran with it. And you really flesh out so much of that people associate with. And because of that, there's a huge fan following because of it. And there's even a convention called GemCon.
Which I've been to many times. Yeah. Oh, no, it's amazing. There are so many Jem fans out there, and it's astounding. But it started life, obviously, as a line of dolls. I mean, that's what they had first, were the dolls. And then they had a deal with Sunbow Productions. And Sunbow Productions was the animation production arm of the ad company that worked with Hasbro. There was an ad company that handled the G.I. Joe account and a lot of stuff with Hasbro. And so when Hasbro had this line of dolls, they came to them and came to Sunbow Productions. And I had been writing G.I. Joe, so Sunbow came to me to do the development. So basically they had the line of dolls, and they had not much else. I mean, they had some product names, which they're still in the process of changing. So I did get to do all of the creation on that, all of the character development and the setup of the story, and creating Starlight Music and the Starlight Girls and the villain, Eric Raymond, who is named after my brother.
I love that. I love that so much.
And he loves it too. So I did get to do all the creation basically on that, pretty much all of the creation. They had the basic concept and the dolls, and then I got to do all of the rest, which was wonderful. And I wrote like 22 out of 65 of the episodes. So I spent a lot of time working on that.
Did you have a favorite doll from the line? One either from like aesthetically that you thought was just the best one done, that's your favorite?
I only ever saw prototypes. I mean, I didn't really, they never gave me any dolls.
Jerks.
After the show was on, my mother was so thrilled, she'd see my name up there on the television screen. She actually went out and bought me a Jem doll. It was pretty awesome. And it's now at the Strong Museum of Play in New York.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Luckily, when we decided to move from San Mateo up to Magalia, I ended up letting the Strong Museum acquire about 12 boxes full of action figures and toys and things that I had acquired throughout my career, including that particular Jem doll. So luckily, that stuff is now at the Strong Museum instead of ashes up in the forest.
There's the
So
Indiana.
that was a bit of luck. So they
Yeah.
actually have a Christy Marx collection of dolls and toys and action figures and things like that.
I'll be sure to link that in the description because the Strong Museum is awesome and all the work that they do is amazing in terms of preserving all things play.
And games too. They're very much into trying to preserve game documents and games and things like that.
Yep. Final question. Have you had a favorite interaction with a fan at one of those conventions? Or just a Jem fan in general?
I wouldn't say one particular one, but I would say that the Jem fans are like some of the best people ever. And I have just had moving, heartfelt, wonderful interactions with Jem fans over the years, whether it's letters or personal interactions or email or whatever it is. I'm constantly hearing from Jem fans about what an impact the show had on them and how it affected them or changed their lives or inspired them to become a musician or whatever. And it's a wonderful thing. It means a lot to me. And some of those people are just have become friends because I've seen them again and again and again at the Jem cons and so forth. And just, I don't know, they're just all really, really good people. That's all I can say. It's been heartfelt to hear that Jem would help them through, say, a very tough time in their lives. Maybe when they were struggling with identity issues or they were struggling personally at home or whatever they were struggling with, and it helped them get through the tough times or inspired them to do something creatively. And I think you can't ask for a better legacy than that, really.
Yeah. Thank you as a fan, as a fellow fan as well. Thank you for writing all those amazing episodes of things. Going back has been a joy to go rewatch that stuff. So thank you. Your work matters. Your work still matters, and I can't wait to see what the next thing you do is. So.
All right. Well, I may have some exciting news in the near future, but nothing I can actually talk about specifically now.
Damn it! All right. Well, Christy, it's been an absolute pleasure.
A little too early, but.
Oh, that's okay. Christy, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I really could talk to you for like another 2 hours, but I want to respect your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to plug? Social media sites, cool things happen in your life?
Oh, well, you've already plugged the book, so I mean, yes. Just go out and buy the book. That'll help. That's always helpful. Royalties are always nice. I do have my website, ChristyMarx.com, and I do sell autograph scripts on the site. So if people want to get an autograph script from any of the various things that I've worked on, there's a page where they can do that. But I'm not doing a blog or anything at the moment.
Cool. I'll make sure all that's in the description of the video. Well, Christy, thank you very, very, very so much for your time. It was a lot of fun to talk to you.
All righty. Yeah, I could do this again for another hour too. So maybe we will someday.
That would be fantastic. I'd love that. Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Show's over, Synergy.